Kevin, this podcast needs an infusion of cold, hard cash. Kashmir Hill.
Yes, today we're talking with my colleague Kashmir Hill, who writes about technology and privacy for the New York Times. She's got a new story out, and it's a banger.
This is one that really caught people's attention, and for good reason, because the more of this story that you read, the higher your blood pressure goes.
It's true. This is a story about cars and all of the data that cars collect about their users and drivers, and how cars have become kind of a privacy nightmare. It's a really good story. It's about some of these new programs that car companies have installed in their cars that allow them to remotely collect data and then not just keep that data for themselves, but actually sell that to places like insurance companies, which can use it to say, well, Casey's a very bad driver. He braked 72 times yesterday for some reason, so we're going to raise his premiums.
That famous sign of being a bad driver, braking.
Well, the broader point is that cars are now basically smartphones on wheels.
They're snitches on wheels is what they are.
And they are being used to keep tabs on the people who drive them increasingly, and with all kinds of consequences for consumers.
Yeah, you truly may have been roped into one of these schemes without even knowing it. And so if you have your car connected to the internet in any way and you haven't yet read Cash's story, I promise you this is one you're going to want to listen to.
And when Cash started looking into this, she learned about this whole sort of hidden world of shady data brokers and companies that are selling your data from your car to insurance companies. And today we wanted to talk to Cash about what she found out in her reporting and what she thinks is going to happen next. If there's any hope for us in this new world of connected cars, or if we're all just destined to be surveilled and snooped on by these things that we drive around. So today we're turning hard fork into card fork.
That doesn't work at all. Even a little bit. God.
Cash Hill, welcome back to Hard Fork.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be on this award-winning podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
Didn't you guys win the
award.
Oscar for Best Technology Podcast earlier this week?
Is the iHeart Podcast Award the Oscar of podcast awards?
Many people are saying it is.
In that case.
Yeah, it was us versus Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
So, Cash, let's talk about this story. When did you decide to write about data collection in cars, and why?
So I was spending a lot of time kind of lurking on online car forums, like forums for people who drive Corvettes and Camaros and Chevy Bolts, which I drive. And I started to see people saying that their insurance had gone up. And when they asked why, they were told to pull their LexisNexis consumer disclosure file. LexisNexis is this big data broker, and they have a division called Risk Solutions that kind of profiles people's risk. When they did that, they would get these files from LexisNexis that had hundreds of pages, including every trip that these people had taken in their cars over the previous 6 months, including how many miles they drove, when the trip started, when it ended, how many times they hit the brakes too hard, accelerated rapidly, and sped. And when they looked at how LexisNexis had gotten the data, it said the provider was General Motors, who, the company that manufactured their cars.
Right. So your story starts with this anecdote about this man named Ken Dahl, which, by the way, great name. And he is a 65-year-old Chevy Bolt driver. And like you, he owns a Chevy Bolt, or I guess he drives a leased Chevy Bolt. And his car insurance went up by 21% in 2022. And he was sort of like, what the heck? Why are my premiums going up? I've never been, responsible for a car accident.
Yeah.
He goes looking and he asks for his LexisNexis report and gets back a 258-page document detailing basically his entire driving history. So does he then make the conclusion that this is why his premiums have gone up, because he's a bad driver?
Well, he says he's a very safe driver. He said his wife is a little bit more aggressive than him.
Sure, blame the
Likely
spouse.
story. Blame Barbie.
Yeah.
And she also drives his car. He said that the trips that she took, which during the weekdays, he said when he doesn't usually use the car, had a few more hard accelerations, hard brakes. And it looked to him like this is why his insurance went up.
And we should say, it's like, Just because you accelerate hard in a car doesn't necessarily mean that you did anything wrong, right? And if you had to brake really hard, that also might not have been your fault. And so I think one of the things that's infuriating, Cash, reading your story, is that this data, which lacks a lot of really important context, is being hoovered up, often without the knowledge of the people involved, and then being used to gouge them on price. But I really was just struck by the way that these insurance companies were so eager to use data that might not actually be incriminating.
Right. And LexisNexis told me LexisNexis said they don't actually give the trip data to insurance companies. They give a score that LexisNexis gives the driver, a driver score based on that data, and that's what they're sharing. But interestingly, they didn't give Kendall his score, so he doesn't actually know what his score is.
But that's like such a corporate thing to say, is like, oh, don't worry, we're not giving the individual data. We've created a mysterious, impenetrable black box and handed that to the insurance companies. But, just trust us. It's actually really well done.
Well, the other company, Verisk, did say we just give all the trip data.
So let's talk about how widespread is this? Which cars are sending data about their drivers to insurance companies? Which companies are involved in this? Is this sort of an industry-wide practice, or is this just GM and LexisNexis? Is it pretty contained?
So if your car has connected services, like if you have a GM car and you have on OnStar, or a Subaru and you have on Starlink, your car is sending data about how you use it back to the auto manufacturers. At this point, the only ones that I know of who are providing it to insurance companies are GM, Kia, Honda, Hyundai, Mitsubishi. Trying to think of anyone else I left off the list. These are companies that, Subaru being an exception, Subaru says they only give odometer data to LexisNexis, but the other companies all have in their apps now this driver scoring, driver feedback. With GM, it's called Smart Driver. And if you turn it on, they give you feedback about your driving, like drive slower, be gentle with the accelerator, buckle your seatbelt.
Drive faster, take more risks.
Change the music.
Get out of the carpool lane. I'm trying to pass you.
Stop looking at your phone, which is giving you all this feedback. But for people that turn this on, they may not have realized it, but they were saying yes. A lot of these programs are actually kind of run by Verisk or by LexisNexis. They're the ones giving you the feedback, not the automaker. And so you were kind of just sharing it with them. This was not well disclosed. In the case of GM, it was not evident at all from any of the language. And a lot of people said that Smart Driver was turned on for their cars, and they didn't turn it on. They didn't even know what it was. And it does. GM gives bonuses to salespeople at dealerships who get people to turn on OnStar, including Smart Driver. So they may have been enrolled by the salesman when they bought their car. But for other people, if you turn this on, you're sharing your data. And when you go out shopping for car insurance and you're trying to get quotes, a lot of the insurance companies will say, can we have permission to get third-party reports on you, like your credit file? And when you say yes to that, that releases all of that data to go over to the insurance company. And this is just, people did not realize this was happening.
Right. And that detail about salespeople being incentivized to enroll people, often without even fully informing people of what they're enrolling in, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, this product exists because it is essentially free money for GM and these other car manufacturers, right? I think in your story, you say they're making millions of dollars a year by selling this data. And is this really anything more than a cash grab?
I mean, the car companies say that this is about safety, that they're trying to help people be safer drivers with this, driving coach. But, for some of these people at Smart Driver turned on, they didn't even know it was on. They're not getting the feedback. And, as you say, General Motors, my understanding is they make in the low millions of dollars per year with this program, which they described to Senator Edward Markey. He asked them, are you selling data? And they said, the data that we sell, that we commercially benefit from, is de minimis to our 2022 revenue. So for them, it's nothing. This is
Right. It's a drop in the bucket.
It's
This
a drop
is
in
not
the bucket with
moving
the
their
billions.
overall finances.
But it's not de minimis for the people who have to pay 20% more on their car insurance all of a sudden for reasons that they don't even understand.
Right. So I think what we're seeing is, the surveillance capitalism model. The Google, the Facebook, you get something for free, you're paying with your data. It's really spreading to all of these other companies.
Yep.
And the automakers are like, well, we're getting all this data. We can monetize this too. Right now, they're not actually making that much money. Like low millions is small. And some of the automakers told me, we don't get paid for sharing the data. We only get paid when an insurance company buys it. So they don't even have a good business deal on this. Like they should be getting money for all the data.
There is something really damning about saying to the senator, it's like, hey, we don't even make all that much money off this. Okay, well then why are you violating the privacy of your entire user base if you can't even get a good price for it?
Yeah. One question I have for you, Cash, is like how many other uses are car companies finding for this data? Are they just selling it to insurance companies to sort of, raise people's premiums? Or, I can imagine a situation where, a company might like to know, which drivers are driving past their store every day so they can show them, targeted ads on social media. How many buyers are there for this kind of car data?
Look, there's a lot of information that's flowing out of your car and a lot of potential buyers. At this point, what I mainly have been focusing on is this insurance thing. And when it comes to the insurance data, the one thing that all the automakers pointed out is that they're not providing location details. That's just when you started the trip, when it ended, how far you drove, and that it doesn't actually include the location data. But that's not to say the companies don't have it. They're just, in this case, not selling that.
This is in some ways like not a new phenomenon. Insurance premiums are, they vary based on things like where you live and how new your car is. And like, are you a young man who is likely statistically more likely than someone who's older to be in an accident? Those kinds of things are used to change the prices of insurance premiums all the time. And I guess from the insurance company's perspective, this is just one more piece of data that they can use to make decisions about how much of a risk someone is out on the road. Did you hear any sort of principled defenses of this while you were reporting the story from the insurance companies or the companies that sell data to them?
What the automakers really focus on is that they set up these programs to help people get discounts. And so they're talking about
God.
So like some of the programs, like Honda's, for example, if you turn on driver feedback and then you have a good score, the actual app will kind of offer to connect you with some company who's going to give you a 20% discount. And so they're really focusing on, we're trying to help our customers and get them discounts. What they're not talking about is when that data is flowing out and it's hurting their customers. Like I talked to this one Cadillac driver who lives in Palm Beach, Florida. And in December, it was time for him to get new insurance. And he got rejected by 7 different companies. And he was like, what is going on?
Like they just wouldn't sell him insurance for any price.
They would not cover him, and his auto insurance was about to expire. And he said, like, what is going on? He orders his LexisNexis report, and he has 6 months of driving data in there. And he says, like, look, I don't consider myself an aggressive driver. I'm safe. But he's like, yeah, I like to have fun in my car, and I brake a lot, and I accelerate. Like, my passenger's head isn't hitting the dashboard or anything like that.
Can it tell whether you're doing donuts in the parking lot? Because I actually would like to know that.
But he says, look, I've never been in an accident, and I couldn't get insurance. He had to go to a private broker and ended up paying double what he was paying before for insurance. So, it really, in that case, hurt him a lot.
So, here's where I guess I can, maybe feign some sort of sympathy for the idea of doing this, which is like, I do want worse drivers to have higher insurance premiums, right? Like, I think that is how we want the insurance market to work. I think if you're a good driver, your insurance should be lower. And the best way to know who is a good driver and who's a bad driver is to monitor them obsessively. But what you have revealed here, Cash, is that once we implemented this sort of surveillance system, it seemed to do what all surveillance systems do, which is needlessly penalize innocent people, right? So, like, we have all of the downsides of a surveillance system with really none of the upside.
Yeah, I too want safer roads, Casey. I get annoyed at aggressive drivers.
Yeah.
And I talked to this one law professor from the University of Chicago, and he said, usage-based insurance, that's what you call this. When you tell an insurance company, they can watch you, they can see you're driving. He said it works. He said the impact on safety is enormous, and that people drive better when they know that they're being monitored and that they're going to pay more, if they drive aggressively or unsafely. But that's not what was happening here. People were being secretly monitored,
Right.
and then they're paying more, and they don't know why. And that is not going to make the roads any safer.
Yeah, that does feel like the stickiest part of this to me is like the disclosure piece. Like if I've had experiences in the past couple years, like, well, I'll go rent a car if I'm on like a work trip or something. And part of what I know when I'm renting the car is that the rental car company is tracking that car. And I know this because they tell you when you sign up, and it's, very clearly disclosed, like, we will track this car, if it gets stolen or something, we can help you track it down, that kind of thing. So I know that I'm being monitored while I'm driving a rental car. And so I do tend to drive a little bit more conservatively in a rental car. I can imagine that expanding to lots of other cars, but the people have to know that they're being monitored in order to be able to drive safer as a result of being monitored.
Absolutely.
So, Cash, talk about your reporting a little bit on this. So you started looking through these car forums. You started seeing evidence that people were having their premiums raised as a result of this surveillance by their cars. When you approached the car companies, the data brokers, the insurance companies, did they try to deny what was going on? Were they pretty open about it? How did they react?
I thought that I was expecting denials. I was expecting that, they would say this wasn't happening, because it just seems so shocking to me that they would be doing this. But they ended up kind of confirming it. But there was some evasive language about how it worked. One of the big things I was asking different companies is, where do you disclose this is happening? And with GM, the spokeswoman said, it's in the OnStar privacy policy in
Which
the section
everyone
called,
reads before they click accept in its entirety.
in the section about sharing data with third parties. And so I go and read that section, and the section doesn't say anything about LexisNexis or Verisk or telematics, which is what you call this driving data. It says, like, if they have a business deal with somebody like SiriusXM, which is the company they name there, SiriusXM is going to get some data from your car. And I just was very shocked that there was nothing more explicit anywhere. And I told you I have a Chevy Bolt. So I went to the My Chevrolet app. I connected my car to the My Chevrolet app and went through the smart driver enrollment. And all it says is, like, get digital badges. Like, you can get Brake Genius and Limit Hero.
Brake Genius! One of my favorite bands from the last year.
Yeah, I'm putting that on my LinkedIn profile. Certified Brake Genius.
Get driving tips. And there's just absolutely nothing that would make you realize that as soon as you turn Smart Driver on, that General Motors is going to start sharing everything about how I drive my Bolt with LexisNexis and Verisk and whoever else I didn't find out about in my reporting.
It should just show you like the splash screen of a Panopticon, and it should say, is this the future you want? Just tap yes to continue.
Well, I really do think, like, every company wants this model now. They're just thinking about, how can I get an extra, revenue stream through monetizing the data of my customers? And this is not just automakers. This is just anything we're buying now that's internet connected.
I mean, what it made me think of when I read your story was TVs, because a very similar, scenario has been happening with smart TVs, which collect all kinds of data about what people watch on them, and then they can sell that data to advertisers. So it is actually, in some cases, I bought a new TV a few years ago, and I went through this process of realizing that it is actually cheaper to buy a smart TV than a non-smart TV in many cases, because part of how the smart TV makers are making money is not through selling you the hardware. It's actually through capturing the data and selling the data. So it is we do sort of have this phenomenon where, as hardware, any hardware, whether it's a car or a TV or a refrigerator or a smart toaster or something, as it becomes more connected and more like a device in its own right, the data actually in some cases becomes more valuable than the actual piece of hardware.
Well, I mean, Cash, don't we just see this all the time, that privacy is just increasingly a luxury good for rich people to pay for?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But even rich people, I mean, they're buying expensive cars and their cars are still sending data back about them. I mean, that's one objection I saw from drivers, like people at General Motors. They said, hey, I paid a ton of money for this car. If you're going to sell my data, I want a cut of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's how I would solve this problem. I think that each manufacturer should be allowed to make one car that just sort of sends all your data to everywhere, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can just sort of choose. So if you buy a GM snitch, you know that that's what's going to happen.
But it should cost $100.
It should cost
be the cheapest car on the market.
It should cost $100 on my little GM snitch. It has a direct line to the police whenever I sort of cross over the center divider. And other than that, knock it off.
Yeah, Cash, what has the response been to your story? Is are lawmakers outraged? Are drivers?
I'm outraged.
Are drivers sending you stories about being spied on? What has the reaction been?
So I'm definitely hearing from lots of other drivers who are discovering that they had some of these features turned on. They didn't know it, and they're turning it off. I did a kind of like news you can use box at the bottom of the story, and I said, here's how to figure out if this is what your car is doing. And one of those was there's this website called the Vehicle Privacy Report that you can go to, and it'll tell you put in your VIN number, and it tells you what your car is capable of collecting. So the person who runs that site said, like, I've had tens of thousands of people come and do it off of your story. I included the link to LexisNexis to go request your consumer disclosure file. And not just for auto data, that file is crazy. It had me associated, I mean, it had tons of pages for me, had me associated with my sister's email address from middle school in the 1990s. I was like, why? So I think everyone should request that, request their Verix file. And, I talked to Senator Edward Markey for the story, and he's been very interested in what data is being collected by cars and what automakers are doing with it. And he said, when I described to him what GM had done, he said, this sounds like a violation of the law that protects us from unfair and deceptive business practices. So I'm sure there's going to be more to come from this story.
Yeah. And what can drivers do if they are worried that their car is snooping on them and sending data to a data broker or to their insurance company to raise their premiums? What should they actually do to prevent that? Or are there certain car makers who are not collecting this kind of data? What can the average driver do? I
mean, there are, I can tell you from my time in the car forums, I mean, there's some people that don't want their data going out from their cars, so they hack it, basically. They turn off the connected services. They make sure that data can't leave their car. I mean, if you sign up for connected services, you are, connecting your car back to the auto manufacturer's, cloud servers or whatever. It's sending data. So just turning that on means that data is getting sent back. And that's why a lot of these companies, when you buy their car, they're like, oh, you get this for 30 days for free. And so most people turn it on, and then even if you don't pay, you're still connected after that. So
wow, wait, so so they get you to connect it, and then your free trial runs out, but they still keep collecting the data about you that they can sell.
That's my understanding.
That's insane.
That's what you agreed to when you read the 50,000 word privacy policy.
Good Lord.
Wow. See, I would at least like my car's surveillance data to be helpful to me in some way. I would like it to pop up a little notification and say, this is the third time you've driven through McDonald's in the past week. Are you okay? Is something going on in your life? Do you need therapy? Last question, Cash. Do you think this will create a bull market for used cars that don't have any of this stuff in it? Are we going to see people, running out to the car lots to buy the 1985 Ford Bronco that doesn't have any technology in it?
I mean, this was the basic premises of the Battlestar Galactica reboot, by the way. Is that the only spaceship that survived was the one that was not connected to the space internet. And so that when the sort of AI Cylons attacked, only Battlestar Galactica was safe.
Wow.
That's true. And I have seen a lot of people commenting in that way. They're like, oh, I'm so glad I still have a car from 2009. If you've got a CD player in your car, it is privacy protected.
Yeah, I am going to go back to the Flintstones car that you have to pedal with your feet. I don't think that was collecting much data on its drivers. All right. Cash Hill, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Cash.
My pleasure.
You're the best.
All right, thanks for having me on again. I love it.
I'm all worked up now.
What do you have a car, Casey?
No, I don't even have a car.
Casey just had strong feelings for unapparent reasons.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.